every apartment has value. So you have to find out what the niche is as far as what is the value. They're losing a ton of money. I think the big thing that owners are losing at night right now is that they're paying more than ever staffing companies because there's no staff. So you're expecting a staff to try and overcome expectations that they had nothing to do with. If you try to band-aid a property, eventually you're going to pay the piper no matter what kind of maintenance staff you have. So the first piece of advice is do it right the first time. When you need to fix something, fix it. You have a lot of people that are in leadership roles. They're not leaders. I don't know if they weren't taught to be a leader or if somebody saw something in them to be a leader, but a leader is somebody that's accountable.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Multifamily Chronicles. I'm your host, Adrian Danila. Our special guest today is Russ Fried. Russ is the owner of Multifamily Apartment Doctors and a national speaker. Welcome to the show, Russ.
Thank you. How are you this morning?
I'm doing great, Russ. Great to have you.
Thank
I,
you.
uh, I want to start by asking you to share with us your journey in multifamily. How did you start it, and how things evolved to where you are today, the owner of Multifamily Apartment Doctors.
So I moved to Las Vegas in 1993, right before my 18th birthday. My grandparents had originally wanted me to work for their mortgage company. Quickly, I saw that wasn't for me. So I was very familiar with real estate. Both sides of my family had done real estate. My grandfather in New York was an auctioneer and appraiser and did work with Donald Trump's father. I was living in an apartment. And, again, when you're living in Vegas and you're not 21, there's not much to do. So I was like, man, there's all these great women at all these different apartment complexes. I could definitely do this, and thought I would meet people. So I offered to pay the leasing agent $100 to let me know the next time somebody came to the office that was, one of their owners. So they planned to trip one of the owners to the property, and I pretended like I was a leasing agent. And they're like, oh, this is great. Who are you? And I said, oh, I'm Ross Free. And they go, when did you start working here? And I handed them the application. I said, I'm going to start today. So they signed the application, and that started the journey. I've been in the business for over 32 years now. So as I grew in the business, I worked for a company called Archstone, and they had me become a trainer. And then I worked for Pinnacle for over 8 years, and I learned different asset management and manager and training. So I started my own business because part of being a regional for Pinnacle was you had to do business development. So as a third-party company, you had to find owners to come to the company. The more owners you found, the more money you would make. So I found a bunch of owners, and I was expecting a huge check. It was right before the birth of my son. And when they handed me the check, I gave notice. And I said I could do this for myself. So I left Pinnacle and I started my own business. And part of the business was to go troubleshoot properties and help get them leased up. And the other part of the business was to help small third-party companies that wanted to grow, to teach them how to grow and help them grow their business. And I've been doing that for over 16 years. And I started the Multifamily Apartment Doctor because, if you think about it, when there's a problem, you go to the doctor. So if there's an apartment issue, you would go to the doctor. So that's how I came up with the Multifamily Apartment Doctor. And we specialize in everything to do with an apartment. We can go lease it up, we can train, we can do asset management, we can help people learn how to grow their third-party business. We oversee rehabs, anything that somebody needs help with, we can do.
Russ, what's the size of your company? Like, how many direct employees you have working for you?
So my wife and I own the company, and then we probably have anywhere from 7 to 12 contract laborers, where if we need help sending leasing people to a project, then we have people on contract we can send to a project. Before COVID, I had these contract workers and I had about 7 to 10 business developers. Again, they specialize in helping to grow people's business. So when COVID hit, of course, there was no business to get people because the world shut down. So I decided, my wife had COVID in the very beginning prior to really knowing what COVID was. And she was sick for over 30 days, had 103 fever. And I decided at that point that life is too short and that I only want to do what I can handle. So I gave the employees a severance package, and I just decided to keep it small and to do a lot more speaking and going and troubleshooting properties. And, if there was an occasional business development client I'd want to work with, that I could handle the client so that I didn't need a bunch of employees to work. So that's where we are today.
Russ, with over 30 years in the industry, you've seen multiple market cycles. What current challenges in the multifamily sector are you most concerned about? And how can property managers and owners best adapt to these challenges?
So there's two different challenges that I'm concerned with today. One is the refinances of properties that owners over leveraged what they did to buy the properties. New construction, which is the second concern, has a great expectation for rents. So you're expecting a staff to try and overcome expectations that they had nothing to do with. And the problem is that I think people need to be more direct and blunt with the owners and the developers of what truly is something they can achieve in a market. So I think if you're going to team up with a property management company, or you're going to have your own company, that there needs to be a true expectation, because there's only so much that the management company, the on-site people can do. And what's happening in a lot of these markets is you have two things. One, you have a ton of new construction. And two, you have the B2C properties that are doing a bunch of value add to try to compete with the new construction properties. So the refinance people are competing with the new construction people, and it's creating a lot of people that are either going to lose the property or do a short sale on the property. And you're stressing out staffs that, again, to the best of their abilities, are trying to reach the owners and developers' goals.
Given the current economical pressures on ownership groups, what are some things that you recommend for increasing resident retention? Because, obviously, companies are very tight on what they can spend due to inflation and so many other things. So one of the ways to, maximize profit is to control expenses. And, obviously, residents, moving out generate a lot of expenses, vacancy loss and the turn cost and so on and so forth. What are some pieces of advice that you give owners to increase resident retention during these times?
So it's going to seem like a cliche answer, but if we're keeping life simple, one is you really need to know when you're moving in a resident what the expectation is of what they want. Some places have the most luxurious amenities in the world that seem luxurious, but the resident profile does not care about those amenities. Some residents want a resident meeting where once a month they can share some of their grievances and some of their concerns on a property. When you find out what a resident wants, if it's, having a pool party, if it's having a resident social, if it's having somebody special, a comedian or somebody come in to entertain them, depending on what demographics you're doing, if it's having a PlayStation with the gamers game night, if it's having a Texas Hold'em night, you got to do these little things that cost very little money to be able to keep them. And some of them, they're introverted and they don't care, and, they care about just the quality of the apartment. So knowing what your tenant base wants and making sure that you want to carry that out. And when I say that you want to carry that out, you have to find a staff that wants to do these extra little things. It's very easy that somebody moves in and you give them all the bells and whistles, and then they don't hear from you for 10 months until they get their renewal letter. So, on their birthday, send them a card, give them a $5 Starbucks card. These are little things that make the residents feel like they're part of a community and they're just not renting an apartment.
As far as maintenance services, right? Maintenance is the number one largest controllable expense when it comes to expenses. What are some pieces of advice that you have for operators to better control and have a good hand on their maintenance expenses?
So, that's a very good question. So you're dealing with a couple different factors. One is if you try to band-aid a property, eventually you're going to pay the piper no matter what kind of maintenance staff you have. So the first piece of advice is do it right the first time. When you need to fix something, fix it. Some of that depends on what kind of long-term holder that owner is. But at the end of the day, if you do something cheap, you get what you pay for, it falls apart. So you would want to spend a little money in the beginning to make sure that the work is done right, and that later on you're going to have less of expense because you did it right. As far as turnover cost, it's finding really good vendors. And it's not necessarily finding the cheapest vendor, it's finding really good vendors that give a fair price and they're going to do the work right. So again, that you're moving people into an apartment that is done right. And again, if you don't want to have a lot of maintenance costs, like you said, then you have less turnover. So you have to also make sure that you're qualifying to the right people to the best of your ability so that you also have less turnover. Because a lot of times, and going to answer your question, the right maintenance staff can control expenses as long as they have the right team. So as long as they have the right team, and I'll give an example, you can have a 200 unit property, and 200 units is usually a manager and assistant manager and a maintenance supervisor and a maintenance tech or maintenance worker, whatever you want to do. If that maintenance supervisor, maintenance tech, they walked into a situation, there's 25 vacants and there's 100 work orders that need to be done. To control that maintenance expense, do you want to give them a lot of overtime and burn them out? Or do you want to find a fair vendor to help turn the units and go through this cycle of catching up so that later on that it's a much more easier turn for the maintenance staff? Maintenance is the hardest position to find right now. They're getting unbelievable offers because there's not a lot of maintenance people. So you better make sure that you treat them right the first time or they're leaving. They can go to any market, any company, and because of the shortage, they will get treated extremely well. So you need to make sure that you treat your maintenance people as well as your staff well the first time.
Russ, I want to go to affordable housing next. There's a lot of, conversations about how do we make housing more affordable. One of the latest, I guess, initiatives or like campaign promises that the current administration has is that to make sure that residents are not, they call it overcharged, they're not paying more than they should for rent. That implies rent control. So what's your take on rent control? And then how do we solve the housing crisis, the affordability issue?
That's a very good question. I live in California. I'm based in San Diego, so there is a lot of rent control buildings. They are planning on maybe making just a 3%, no higher than 5% straight across the board. That's all you could increase a tenant in California. You're beginning to see this in some other markets. As far as affordability, when you move to a certain state, you have to do your homework of how much it is to live in that state. Some apartments, like you said, there is tax credit where, again, it goes by income. There is, in California, there's a ton of apartments now that they have to take Section 8 so that it is becoming more affordable for those people because, again, housing is going to pay hypothetically for the entire rent for somebody. As far as controlling it, no matter who wins this election, you're going to see in certain pockets and markets that you're getting on most of the properties that we've worked on, rents are going up $200 plus. So that is hard for some families that are living, day to day, paycheck to paycheck. I think the renter has to be realistic of again, there's a want and a need. We all want to live in Beverly Hills and the mansion, but we all need a roof over our heads. So I think it's picking and choosing the markets and picking and choosing the apartments that are willing to have those programs to be able to help people that are in those situations. But you're also not going to solve the problem because at the end of the day, these owners have to, again, you want to do this resident retention, there's a cost involved in that. So you're still going to see apartments that, depending on the new construction and what the rents are in the market, on some of these older properties, you're still going to see some of these big rent increases.
Russ, some of the markets have been overbuilt lately. The first one that comes to mind would be Austin, Texas, to me, but there are others throughout the country. What are some pieces of advice that you have for developers and owners that have built in those markets and now they're suffering? Where even existing communities, they're not like new builds, they've been around for 5, 10, 20 years. What are some pieces of advice that you could share with them to help them increase occupancy? Because obviously there's not enough pool of prospects to keep everybody at 95 occupied.
So, and it's funny, Philadelphia is a market also that's going through that. So you have to really, as a management company and owner, find your niche. And one of the things that when we go look at a property is we find out every apartment has value. So you have to find out what the niche is as far as what is the value. So I'll give an example. If you know that you have a lot of competition that doesn't take large pets, then your property should consider taking large pets, because the value is, as a pet owner, that if you're looking for a certain area in a certain market, that the value to your community would be that they can go to an apartment that takes large pets. My apartment building that I live in San Diego, they take every pet that you can imagine. So to compete in that construction market, that property gets the rents because they take large pets. We've done other projects that we did a mid-rise in Chicago, and the niche was that we were going to make this mid-rise that was a historical building that was opening up. We made it to like the Ritz-Carlton. You came in after hours, the concierge was there. There was always drinks, food, things of that nature to help that person. There was 24-hour cleaning service. There was always fresh towels in the gym. So you have to figure out, as a property owner and a management company, what is the niche? What is the clientele that's going to really gravitate to my property? And again, you're going to accept anybody that qualifies, but you have to find the niche. You have to find what is going to separate your property from the competition. And if you don't, then you're right. These properties suffer because if 10 people go into a property and they go to the surrounding areas and you have no niche to connect them, if it's a property that, you know what, there's a lot of millennials and there's a lot of gamers, and if you don't have high-speed internet, they're not renting there. So you looking at your main demographic profile and what's going to gravitate people to those properties, that's how you're going to keep them full and finding those renters.
Russ, centralization's been on multifamily's agenda on conversations like more often than ever. I want to get your take on centralization. Is this a real thing that it's happening? At what level it's happening, or is more of a buzzword? Just we talk about it because it's like everybody else is talking about. So, what's your take on centralization in multifamily?
What do you mean by centralization? Give me an example of what you're asking me.
Centralizing services, in other words, let's say rent collection or maintenance, doing it from a central location versus
I understand.
from
Well, you see a lot of these smaller properties that they are centralized, where a big market like Chicago that has 30 unit buildings, 40 unit buildings, 20 unit buildings, they are going to a centralized office. They can't afford to have necessarily a manager on site. They do have to go to this centralized location. The larger properties, you're not going to see that. You're still going to have a manager in the office. You're going to have a maintenance person in the office. So I don't see those processes being centralized. What I do see is that you're going to have less leasing staff, because a lot of people are going to that real estate format where they have a lockbox and the people can go look at the apartments themselves. You're seeing that a lot of companies are, using everything virtual, so that you have less expense of payroll. So that part is very real. At the end of the day, these larger properties, you're still going to have staff. You may have an owner that has two properties, so one building is the main hub. So those other residents have to go to that other office. So that is something you're going to see. But a lot of that is already there and pre-existing. That was pre-existing before COVID. Depending on the size of the building was depending on if you went to a centralized location.
Russ, from conversations with your clients and potential clients, what are the top things that make them lose sleep at night?
Well, the vacancy will always make them lose sleep, and the loss of rent. Again, as an owner, when they buy a building, they have to decide their vision of how long they're going to hold that building. And I think what leaves them sleepless at night is, how do I get in the right way and how do I get out the right way? And if they have a lot of turnover on staff, if they have to make a lot of management changes and go from one management company to another, they're losing a ton of money. I think the big thing that owners are losing at night right now is that they're paying more than ever staffing companies because there's no staff. So they're paying these extraordinary amounts of money until they are able to find staff. This is an uncontrollable expense if you're short on staff. The best, largest, you go through and you see the management companies 1 to 3 that are rated the best place to work and things like that. Depending on how much mass they have on a market. We did a project and we worked with a management company, and they had 130 openings in that market. So you as an owner is just one of 130 properties that have all these openings. So they're losing money. They're not getting the best of the best because, again, you're dealing with temps that may or may not have experience. And you have this vacancy, and now you have vacancy you weren't expected. You may have some delinquency because you may have had a manager that was a little bit gray on their criteria. So they were worried about vacancy. So they took some people that maybe they shouldn't have. And now 3 months later, they're turning the apartment again. So finding the right team and understanding their goals to get in and out of an apartment as far as ownership, that would make me sleepless.
You mentioned staff shortages. A previous guest on a podcast has been mentioning some percentages, some numbers, and they were saying 70% of the current staff at the property level has not been employed in multifamily before COVID. This is only 4 or 5 years ago. So this is a telling number. So basically, only 1 out of 3 people has pre-COVID experience at a site level in multifamily. How do we preserve legacy knowledge about the asset, knowledge about the industry in general, about how to do the job? If we're looking at numbers like this, amazing, like incredibly high turnover numbers, what are some things that we could do as an industry to improve those numbers and therefore legacy knowledge?
Well, the first thing is that it's good that all these new people are coming into the industry because they're excited, they're fresh. I've had the opportunity to have training programs in some of these community colleges, and you're getting people that are excited because what's happened is that in these colleges, when they go to real estate, they're not really learning property management. They're getting some terminology, but they're not really learning property management. So when you talk about the legacy, you need to have those experienced trainers on your property that are really going to train. And what I mean by that is that you have a lot of companies that a brand new employee watches a bunch of modules, which they probably fast forward and get bored. Excuse me, that's not one-on-one training. So the legacy people that are on these properties, either presidents, regionals, they have to make sure that they have the right processes in place to teach these people. Because you're right, there is a ton of new people, but it's a great thing there's a bunch of new people because prior to that, a lot of these new people didn't get an opportunity. So there was a lot of people that wanted to do real estate and they didn't get an opportunity. So to go to your question, is the legacy people the backbones of the company? They got to teach these people. They got to teach them. They got to spend time with them. They got to mentor them, and they got to encourage them. So the bigger question is, where do we find these leaders? See, it's the leadership that is struggling, is that you have a lot of people that are in leadership roles. They're not leaders. I don't know if they weren't taught to be a leader or if somebody saw something in them to be a leader, but a leader is somebody that's accountable. So if there's a problem with vacancy, if there's a problem with delinquency, Well, the manager is only as good as their leader. The manager is only as good as the person that is supervising them to give them the tools to be successful. So the legacy person, in my opinion, is those people. And they exist in the companies. And as long as you have the right leadership that are going to take accountability, that they don't play the blame game with the manager, the on-site staff, where again, you burn out a staff and they quit, and then you got to go find somebody else. So depending on your situation, you got to make sure that you have the right leadership and team, and you need to make sure you have the right infrastructure of training to an employee.
Russ, what are the most critical management practices that multifamily operators should be focusing on during this economic uncertainty to protect and grow their investments, their assets?
I think again, it goes back to, if I am a management company and I am going to marry an owner, and when I say marry, I'm going to sign an agreement and manage their property. Or if I own a property that I'm managing myself, I really need to understand the property, a lot of what we just talked about. And I got to understand what kind of person I need to manage that property. If I have a building that's a high rise and I'm looking for an employee and they don't have high rise experience, that's not always a good marriage. So you have to find the right person for the right building, for the right situation. And you can't be desperate just to hire somebody. So it's understanding from the beginning, what kind of owner am I going to be working with? What kind of staff do I need to hire? Is the budget realistic of what I'm being asked to do? Do I have the means as a company to be able to handle that property? And what I mean by that is, a lot of these third-party management companies, in order to be successful, they need volume. So they need this contract, that contract, in order to survive. So when they're looking at their budgets of what's reality, the best management companies are the ones that take on business that they know they can handle. And they have the infrastructure and employees today to handle it. The owners that own and manage their property, do they want to be a landlord? Do they want to not hire a management company? They want to do this day to day themselves. Do they want all the stress of what it takes to be a management company? So it's really understanding what you're getting yourself into, what are your short-term and long-term goals, and that goes for the ownership and that goes for the management company.
Russ, would you share with us the most successful turnaround story that you had as apartment doctor?
Well, we're doing it right now. We have a project in Dayton, Ohio. It's probably one of the hardest projects that I've ever done in 30 years. The problem with the project was that it went through a lot of different hands. Ownership was very tight on money. You had a lot of investors and people that were losing millions and millions of dollars. And we were there twice. We were there a couple of years ago where we were asked to help. And we worked with a very successful management company. We were beginning to turn it around. And then another management company came in and promised the world. And the management company and us were told, we're good, thank you, we're done. 2 years later, we've been asked to come back in. The occupancy was in the 60s. They had 200,000 out in delinquency. They had no money. We had to come in and right now put the property in a position to refinance or sell. If it wasn't for the asset manager that we've had the opportunity to work with, we would not be able to turn it around. So you had no money. You had to get rid of people because they weren't paying bills. I mean, they weren't paying their rent. You had to find the right team that would work in this very challenging property, that if you had the door open past 4 o'clock and it was winter, you didn't feel safe. It was it's a very challenging area. Thank God it's doing better. And we've had to turn it around. We've done it now for the last year. And I'm lucky to say that right now it's 95% occupancy, collecting more rent than it ever did. And we put it in a position right now to refinance or sell. It will probably sell. It's definitely a feather in our cap. I was very fortunate to have the right consultants to come in and for us to have the time to clean out the property so we could find a very good team, which we have right now. to be able to stabilize the property, which we've done. And that is an example of a property that the niche was that we took Section 8. And in the beginning, the ownership wasn't overly thrilled about that. The Section 8 was fantastic because the niche was that in that market, there were a lot of Section 8 properties that were getting shut down because they weren't getting taken care of. So we had the opportunity to work with the head of Section 8. We were able to get the rents that the ownership needed to put the property in the position that it was today. We were able to get it leased up. Of course, there were other people that came in. We had to rehab the whole property. It was over $2.5 million. Lucky we had the contractor that was patient, that while the ownership had no money, there was a trust that they would actually take on the project, knowing they weren't going to get paid for a long time, but knowing that the investment they were putting in, they were going to get a good payout going out. And that's probably the hardest project we've ever done.
Russ, I want to go to your $1 Million Manager program. I'm going to ask you to share some key takeaways from the program that are particularly relevant in today's multifamily market. How can these principles be applied to improve resident satisfaction and property performance?
So the $1 Million Manager class I started years ago was a class based on you can really make a lot of money in this business as somebody wanting to go into property management or existing going into property management. It's learning all the different facets of one, especially all the new technology today to go along with the basic principles of how to manage a building and the different principles that you need to have to manage a building: multitasking, sense of urgency, leadership, learning all the new technology, understanding how to use that technology to be a very successful property manager. The resident retention, again, the resident retention is a want. If I'm a person and I understand that going into a job, I'm going to have 200 people that may hate me in the beginning because they haven't been taken care of as a tenant. And I have to understand that I'm going into that, and my personality, my values, me understanding what this resident is going through is very important. And I will give you an example. COVID was an example that not only the economic conditions was affecting a resident, the economic conditions was affecting a manager, their leadership. And that was the time that you really saw what kind of staff you had to go through that adversity. A manager may have had to come to work and their spouse was deathly ill. They lost a family member that didn't survive COVID. They have no daycare to watch their kids because, again, these other people were sick. So people they were relying on wasn't there. And that was an example that you saw the teams that you had, and also you saw what kind of employers that you had and who was understanding and who made sure the checks were still coming in to pay bills. As a $1 million manager, you have to know that you're going to wear a lot of different hats, and you're making a choice that you're getting into a business that is customer service heavy. It's understanding the mental condition of the residents and also the employees, which is a big topic right now, is mental health. And understanding you have a lot to learn. These residents today, they can go on social media, they can rip apart a property. Some of it is fair, some of it is not fair. An employee can go on social media and rip apart their company. There's a lot of data that is out there. And you have to do your best every day, because one bad day, one bad review, one bad turn can make or break the property.
Russ, I want to ask you to pull your crystal ball right now and look into the future and share with us, what you see in a crystal ball. What are some trends or shifts that you anticipate will shape the multifamily industry in the upcoming years? And how should investors and operators and property managers prepare for these changes?
We are in an evolution of continued technology. It amazes me every day, all the new technology that is coming about. And some of it is very good. I see that, like you said earlier, that staffs are going to be cut down to go to this centralized system, so to speak, of downsizing staffs to try and do stuff remote. I see a lot of new technology that's going, who's to say that you wouldn't have somebody robotic 10 years from now as your leasing consultants? That's a real possibility. The other thing is we live in a very scary world. We live in a world of more uncertainty than I can remember. My son's 22 years old, and he is going through a generation coming up. COVID's just the beginning. No matter who runs and wins this next 4 years, there's a lot of challenges. There's a lot of unhappy people. There's a lot of countries that are unhappy. We have more stress in a day-to-day life than probably ever before. And this is going to affect the property management industry because you have all these people that are moving and their lives are affected by the financial conditions and all these hardships and challenges. So as a property manager and as a ownership, you have to think about not only what you're doing for your residents today, the different amenities, the different things that people are going to want 5 years from now, 10 years from now. And it's really being prepared for the next crisis. If anyone in this world thinks that COVID was just a one-time thing, it's not. COVID was a wake-up call that one plague could shut down the world, and that no matter if you have the most money in the world, the least amount of money in the world, that at that moment, that everybody's equal because everybody's dealing with the same disease and challenge. So I think that ownership and management companies need to be prepared for that next terrible thing. And they need to be prepared of how they're going to keep their property afloat, give the same service to their teams and their residents. They have a plan. And the biggest thing was that when this happened, there was no plan. The companies that I thought were forward thinkers, they're the ones that did the best out of COVID for their residents and things of that nature. But overall, we were flying. I probably flew to 100 and more properties because I wasn't afraid to get on a plane because my wife already had COVID. I didn't get COVID. When I went out to all these properties and either they didn't have staff, the staff didn't want to have to service a resident because, of course, they were afraid they were going to get COVID. You have a staff member that was devastated that here they were at work. If they didn't come to work, they didn't get paid. Somebody just died. Somebody was sick. Like I said earlier, it was very hard to watch. And as a consultant, the biggest tool that I think that I gave was working hand in hand with those staffs, and that they saw that we were willing to get into the trenches to be able to help them.
Russ, it was great having you here today. Amazing conversation.
Thank you.
I want to give you the opportunity to share some closing thoughts with us. Something you wish you could have shared during our conversation and didn't have the opportunity to.
We would love the opportunity if people need our help to share our formula of how we come up with these niche marketing plans. When we go to a property and our secret sauce of going in and seeing how, with the budgets you have today, to maximize your income and also maximize your teams. And I think that the last thing is we keep coming up with new and new training programs to, one, do something effective when we're speaking to the audience, and giving them more and more new tools to be able to combat with not only the skill set that they need, but the leadership and the tools that they will need to be able to not only balance their work, but to balance their home life. I will leave you with something. Every class I teach, I ask the audience, when was the last time you took a day off? When was the last time you took a vacation? When was the last time that you did something for yourself? And when was the last time that you actually took lunch? You would be fascinated about how many people have not taken a vacation even though they have vacation time. How many people are working 10 to 12 hours, they barely get up to go to the restroom, and that they are working weekends, holidays with it's like a never ending hamster on a wheel that keeps on going. So when we go and talk to people, we really emphasize and give them the tools to be able to live a balanced life. Because again, you use the word legacy. Well, if you have burnout staffs, there is no legacy. So if you have people that were excited to go to work and now they're dreaded to go to work, you're right. You're not going to have those long-term legacy people. So we would love the opportunity to speak to people, give some of our secret sauce, and help people to achieve their goals.
Russ, if someone wants to get in touch with you, what are the best ways to get a hold of you?
The website is www.multifamilyapartmentdoctor.com. I've had the same phone number, 702-429-3490. 24/7, we are happy to answer questions. Facebook, LinkedIn, to be able to help people.
Russ Fried, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.
Everybody, I'm Adrian Danila, your host. This is another episode of Multifamily Chronicles, and I hope to see you back here soon. Have an amazing day.